Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I only own one property that is mortgaged, like most people, but because of the nature of the trust that was set up by the court, that I would be liable to pay the additional stamp duty. As soon as I knew that that was the case, I have alerted and referred myself to the independent advisor on the ministerial code.
The Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner has ended Westminster's summer holidays with a bombshell revelation. Will ethics and tax derail what the government wanted to be its comeback? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Yuan. So the start of September, kids back at school, Parliament returning from recess and a chance for a fresh start for the government. Well, that was the plan anyway. The PM announcing a raft of changes to his Downing Street team aimed at giving him more influence over economic policy. But global investors were focused on the parlous state of finances of a number of governments around the world, pushing UK long-term borrowing costs to their highest level since 1998. And with the date of the budget now in the calendar, the Chancellor under a lot of pressure to raise perhaps as much as £51 billion. The government's finances really look set to dominate the autumn. We'll be talking about all of that later in the show.
But with schools back, Labour was meant to be focused on their childcare initiative rollout that was giving working parents more free hours of childcare. Instead, you also had the Labour government being buffeted perhaps by the right. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper announcing this temporary ban on refugees bringing their family members into the country because of anger around the number of asylum seekers coming to Britain, and this being the subject of quite a concerted campaign also over the summer by Reform UK's Nigel Farage. And now the scandal over Angela Rayner. So this is the minister in charge of housing, tipped as a potential successor to Starmer himself, and it could also open up a whole battle for a senior leadership role in the Labour Party.
Goodness, well, a lot to unpick, and our UK politics reporter James Woolcock is across all the detail of this story. James, just give us a little wrap of how this has unfolded.
Well, it's moving so quickly, Ewan, and it's worth saying that by the time this comes out, we may yet know even more, because a long and short of it, the argument from her critics is Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner bought a house that under law is her second home, despite being Housing Secretary, and yet may have underpaid tax on that home. And she's admitted that in later tax advice she did. The question now for Keir Starmer, the Cabinet and the wider public is, was she given faulty legal advice, or did she know at the time this might be a problem and didn't advise it? And it's all coming back to an ethics probe that some in the media are saying could come back as soon as this Friday. Keir Starmer has said he will, quote, act on the results of that probe. It's funny that that's somewhat been written up as he'll both refuse to rule out resigning and sacking Angela Rayner, but also refuse to rule out that she would keep her job. It is all still to play for, but the big takeaway is, at the start of this week, the first 12 months of Labour's sort of government had not gone very well, but one of the few people who you would say in Cabinet who seemed to be on cross her brief, was well liked and had done well at navigating politics was the Deputy Prime Minister. That's all been shredded this week.
I think it's also really interesting in this modern age of communication, social media and so on, that it feels really jarring to me that one of the lawyers who says that they dealt with Rayner's purchase of this property almost instantly came out with a statement sort of saying, look, we think we might be being scapegoated here. And so there's also the question of, there are no fig leaves out there. If you're on social media, you can get your point across if you feel that you've been accused of something, which I think is a very novel and incredibly hard place then for a government to be in. So how much of a threat is this to Labour?
I mean, there's something in that question, Caroline, which is, to give a hat tip to some of the reporters on this, the Mail and the Telegraph have been following the story for weeks, and they will keep following it. And that the conveyancers who gave that statement did so after some of the print journalists found out that it was them who had originally given Rayner the advice. So in some ways, this is a classic sort of political scandal story, and the press will keep on going. And the problem for both Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Chancellor Rachel Reeves is they were already looking to try and reset the political narrative ahead of what could be a very difficult budget. questions around tax, even if it is only, say, £40,000, which in the grand scheme of the UK sort of more than 1 trillion sort of annual spend, is not very much, risk setting the wrong tone for a government that may need to ask its citizens to pay more. Now,
Angela Rayner is the elected deputy leader of the Labour Party, and that's a job that she can't be fired from. But tell me about whether her job as deputy prime minister is at risk.
I think the questions for the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who has her in his cabinet, are: can she stay as housing secretary, despite this issue being around property? Does it look worse for Labour and him to have an incredibly popular Labour figure on the backbenches if he were to take her outside cabinet, who could then become a lightning rod? And also, what precedent does it set if a very senior cabinet member were to be sacked from their role in cabinet, given Starmer is of a similar kind of level of seniority? So far, the people who've left the Labour administration, the likes of former City Minister Philip Aldrick, Louise Hay, the Transport Secretary, have not been quite in the kind of core sort of 3 or 4 Labour ministers. Angela Rayner definitely would be if she were to go. So much now hinges on this ethics report that we could hear from, as soon as later today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't know what will be found or revealed in that. Rayner has defended herself, of course, saying that it was all to do with faulty legal advice. We don't know yet whether that will emerge as being true. But look, I'll say a couple of things. One, the newspapers are wired for scalps. It feels like, as you say, a vintage political, potentially scandal there, and they're going to kind of keep ferreting away. But social media's made for memes, and I'm absolutely staggered at the deluge of memes, and often AI generated, that I've seen also about Angela Rayner, songs and music, the whole thing. It's kind of wild online.
Yeah, in a way, she's kind of good material, isn't she, for the meme makers? Of course, she's somebody that kind of enjoys publicity, but probably not this week. Thanks so much for that, James. Now, from a row over tax to rows over taxes, we found out the date of the budget this week, and Rachel Reeves has opted for a late one, less than a month before Christmas, and that leaves her plenty of time: A, to see if the economy manages to eke out some growth; B, to work out what shape the global bond market is in; and C, to test the water for potential tax rises. All 3 of these specialist subjects for our senior UK economy reporter, Philip Aldrick. Phil, thanks for joining us on the show today. Now, what shape are the government's finances in now? And just talk us through the potential gap that the Chancellor's facing.
Yeah, so obviously the public finances are historically, for the UK, not looking particularly healthy. We've got close to 100% of debt to GDP, which is, I did a piece recently where it was something like it was the 5th highest in the of OECD's 36 advanced countries. We also had one of the highest deficits, and we've also got I think it was the 3rd highest borrowing costs. So that's because obviously interest rates are at 4%, are twice what the ECB interest rate is at the moment. So when you put it all together, the fiscal situation, the public finance situation in the UK is a little sketchy. I mean, obviously the US is more out of control. France is in crisis, basically. Italy looks more of a basket case in some ways. So it's always a relative game.
Right.
But we're basically
relatively bad all around. Frankly.
Yeah, exactly. We're at the relatively bad end, and we're close to the. We're in the top 5 or top 6 for all these metrics. So it's not a great place to be, and obviously the problem is there's 3 things which have been happening. One is that the cuts that the savings that Reeves was hoping to make were reversed by the Labour rebellion. That was on the pensioner benefits and on welfare. The borrowing costs have gone against her, so it's up between £5 and £8 billion since the March budget. And then the big thing is that the Office for Budget Responsibility is going to be doing, they've said that they've got this under review. It's going to be doing a downgrade on the growth trajectory for the UK effectively, and that may punch something like 12, 15 or more billion pounds in her plans on top of the other 2 problems.
Yeah.
So you get to around 25 to 30 billion pounds of a fiscal problem, which she's got to basically find the money to get back where she was in March, and that's the big challenge.
Yeah. And so spending cuts immensely difficult. The Labour Party hasn't really managed to get through some of the spending cuts that it has already tried to pass. And therefore, all the speculation about tax increases for the autumn budget. I mean, should there be so much angst? I just noted, the top of my head, all the taxes that people are talking about. A windfall tax on banks. Retailers have urged the government not to tax them. Property taxes, either on sale or council tax or some other sort of tax on property and the value of it. Pensions could be taxed. IHT, inheritance tax, and the tape of that could go. Partnerships, like in law firms, could be taxed. I mean, that's just the list that I could remember.
I know, and it's not, and that was all before the budget date was given, and so now I've got 12 weeks until the budget. So the Treasury position on this is that the kite flying is from the journalists, from the media. The kite flying is not from them.
Does everyone believe that?
You didn't put gambling tax in there.
Oh, okay.
That's another one.
Yes. Well, we are a nation of gamblers, actually.
The Treasury is definitely keeping their cards very close to their chest. So at the moment, there's been this kind of approach, I think, where if people have heard things, they are not countering them. They don't want to find themselves in this kind of game where they give you a steer. Yeah, that sounds about right, or no, that doesn't. That one is wrong. And then they kind of, when they don't deny a story, you're like, yeah, that's definitely happening, type of thing. So they're just letting everything run at the moment. So this is why we're getting so many tax stories coming out, because they're just not pushing back at all, and I think part of that is because the process is just getting underway, and part of it is because there are concerns that in the past the stories would get a bit of a life of their own before the Treasury had them under control, really.
It does all feel a little bit like last year, doesn't it? Because there was a lot of criticism that last year the government did a lot of bad stuff for consumer confidence because they talked about all these tax rises, and it slightly feels like we're going through all that again. Yeah,
and that's the danger, which is that letting all these stories run it's having an impact on confidence, it's having an impact potentially on investment. So I think, I now things are happening. The budget date has been launched. I mean, what can she do apart from tax rises, right? What can she do? She can focus on growth. I mean, you hear every time there's a budget, the growth is the solution, right?
Yes.
But this time, because they're going to get a growth downgrade, it's even more urgent. So you need to have growth measures to try and offset the downgrade to a large degree. So it's this damage control budget, as it were. And I think we are going to see a series of announcements on growth, whether that moves the dial on whether on the level of the downgrade or not is yet to be seen. But that's okay. The other thing that seems to be on the cards, and I imagine there will be some manner of spending restraint. The markets, and I think Treasury and government officials are perfectly aware that you can't just chuck everything onto tax and expect that not to have a second round effect through onto growth, which then causes your debt to GDP position to deteriorate. So and you've got to show some willingness to take some pain there. So there's going to be some kind of spending restraint.
The only thing I want to add to that is that economic growth at the start of this year wasn't that bad for Britain. And yes, things look like they're deteriorating, but I don't want to be entirely negative about the economic picture for the UK. So it's worth chucking that. Yeah, no,
that's a really important point, which is in the first half, as Labour has said, and as we've written, we had the fastest GDP growth of the G7. The UK it has inherited difficulties, but things were looking up in the first half of this year. The downgrade is from the OBR will be to the forecast for the future years, and the key year is actually 29-30, and it's that year that the downgrade is really going to matter, because that's when her fiscal rules bite. But in the immediate outlook things have been looking a bit better than expected this year.
And what about something more radical, maybe a tweak to the fiscal rules? I mean, they're not set in stone, are they? Or maybe something helpful from the Bank of England, perhaps some sort of something on bond sales?
Yeah, so on September the 18th, we've got the Bank of England rate decision, which is nothing is expected to happen on rates, but there'll be lots of excitement about what it does on its quantitative easing portfolio and the rate at which it's unwinding it. At the moment, it's doing a lot of active sales of gilts, which market operators or market experts are saying is destabilising, particularly those longer end, the 10-year to 30-year gilt sales are impacting the market, driving up yields, making borrowing costs more expensive. So it's entirely plausible. Markets actually expect the bank to actually change, to reduce the amount of active sales they're doing. Now, if the bank wants to have a real big impact on markets, it needs to go further than what markets are expecting, and possibly even end active sales altogether. But so that's definitely one thing that's in the air.
Okay, Phil, thank you so much for being with us. That is our senior UK economy reporter, Philip Aldrick, ahead of the budget. We now know 26th of November. That's actually the day before Thanksgiving. I don't think maybe people in the UK pay that much attention to it, but markets probably do, because obviously, the markets in the US are closed. In terms of where this leaves the government, we've just had the most incredibly hectic first week. I was just trying to get the kids packed off to school, but then every single day, fresh headlines from the government. Yeah, politics and economics all within a few days. It felt like the economics is going to roll on, and we're going to be in for weeks and weeks of this speculation. You can't help but wonder what it's going to do for not only for consumer confidence, but for people's views of the government, because most of these tax rises may not fall on ordinary people. Talk about tax rises doesn't tend to go down very well. That's it from us for today. This episode was produced by James Woolcock, and our audio engineer was Andrew Gavin. I'm Caroline Hepker. And I'm Yuan Potts. This is Bloomberg.